So over the last 20 years, there has been rapid change in the world, more rapid change than ever in human history. The internet, the smartphone, social media, and now AI, they have all presented a leadership challenge greater than ever before. Closing the generational gap between the athletes that we lead and ourselves, it's harder than ever to build that trust, to build those connections, and to create buy-in. Now, to help us lead this new generation, and I know many of our listeners are definitely struggling to coach and even to lead in the workplace. To help us today, we've got the expert, Dr. Tim Elmore. Dr. Tim Elmore is the founder and CEO of Growing Leaders and is a best-selling author and international speaker who uses his expertise on generations to equip educators, coaches, leaders, parents, and other adults to impart practical life and leadership skills to young adults that will help them navigate through life. He educates adults to help them understand the challenges and experiences today's generations face and connect them in a way that resonates. Dr. Elmore believes by cultivating leadership ability in young adults and encouraging adults who guide them, growing leaders can be the catalyst for emerging generations that will truly change the world. Tim Elmore teaches leadership courses and speaks at schools, universities, businesses, and athletic programs. He has trained thousands of leaders in partnership with nationally renowned schools and organizations like the Kansas City Royals, Stanford University, University of Alabama, the NFL, Ohio State University's athletic department, Chick-fil-A, and more. He's authored more than 30 books, including Habitudes, Images That Form Leadership Habits and Attitudes, Marching Off the Mat, Inspire Students to Navigate a Brand New World, Generation IY, Secrets to Connecting with Today's Teens and Young Adults in the Digital Age, 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid, and Artificial Maturity, Helping Kids Meet the Challenge of Becoming Authentic Adults. And I reached out to him after I had just read Generation Z Unfiltered, which was the best book I had read to date around how to better parent and coach and lead this new generation. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm your host, JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better culture. In addition to this podcast, I'm the founder of TOC, which provides one-on-one coaching and consulting for leaders. Learn more about us at tocculture.com. This episode is brought to you by the Culture System online training platform. It's the ultimate resource for coaches who want to become more transformational and build winning team cultures. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your coaching to the next level, our one-of-a-kind online training platform is designed to help you learn the Culture System framework at your own pace. Through this course, I'll share with you the proven methods, tools, and strategies used by some of the best teams and organizations in the world. You'll get access to customizable digital tools and a group chat to engage with experienced coaches and apply the 4-part framework throughout your season. With the Culture System online training, you'll be inspired and transformed through the stories and lessons of real leaders who've successfully applied these methods and tools within their organizations. You'll gain a deeper commitment to transformational coaching and be equipped with the tools and strategies you need to build a great team culture. To get access to this course today, simply go to tocculture.com and click on the online course tab, or click on the link provided in the details of this episode. Don't miss this opportunity to become a more transformational coach and take your team to the next level with the Culture System online training platform.
Well, Tim, we're excited to have you on the podcast here today, and I want to get you started with this question. I'm going to tell you just a quick story of where I first encountered your work, and it was your first book that came across my desk here was when I was at a coaching clinic, and Mike Neighbors, who is now the head women's basketball coach at the University of Arkansas, was one of the speakers at this clinic, and we're expecting X's and O's and full court pressure defense, and he comes out and he says, this book has changed the way that I think about interacting my players. And he talked about Generation IY.
Yep.
And he went on to give us an outline kind of the book. And the thing that stood out to me that really just, I had never thought about for the first time, and this is kind of where I want to start our conversation here, is Mike took from the book and said, for the first time in human history, really, the generation of kids that are growing up today are growing up in a different world, profoundly different from the world of their parents. And what that means is a lot of the experiences that they're having, we never had, and therefore
Yeah.
creates all kinds of challenges. And I just thought, to me, it used to be I'm old, so I don't understand young people.
Yeah.
But this generational studies and understanding kind of the principles at play here go a lot farther than that. And I wonder if you could just give us a little introduction to that before we get into our conversation today.
Yeah. So Mike is he's been such a blessing to me because he was in an SEC coaches training that I did. He interrupted my session and said, "Everybody needs to get this book. Everybody." And I thought, I need to take you with me on the road. So he's a good man. That's so fun. Well, I tell you what, suffice it to say, the world is changing so rapidly that we cannot, like you just said, borrow from our experiences to inform our own leadership. Here's a good way I like to say it. My parents could not teach me how to raise a child with a portable device in their hand. They never did that. So my wife and I are making it up as we go. And I bet you there's a lot of coaches listening and parents that would say, I'm making this up as I go. So millennials grew up with a cell phone. That was a game changer. Gen Z grows up with a smartphone, an even bigger game changer. So what I hope that coaches get from this conversation is I need to rethink every bit of the delivery that I am making. Maybe the X's and O's may not need to change. Maybe that defense still works, but I got to find a different way to relay it. So the metaphor I like to use, and I did use it in my newest book, is when we all hop on an airplane and we fly to another country, we're all psyched up to work harder at connecting with people in that other country. Let's say it's China, because when we get off, we know, oh, they have different customs here. They probably speak a different language here. They probably have different values here. Bingo. Talking to one of our student athletes may feel like a cross-cultural interaction. And I don't mean to be exaggerated here. It may be. And don't you know coaches that would go, holy moly, I don't even know what that word means that you just used, sway or whatever, So if we'll just get ready and say, I'm going to listen as much as I'm going to talk. I want to make a connection before I make a correction. That's one of the things we've got to do. Then I think we're going to be okay. I hope that at least starts to answer the question you brought up there, Nate.
Yeah, I love that analogy or metaphor with the airplane. That makes so much sense, and it really vastly kind of just changes my mindset, which I think is where it has to start. I'm really excited to talk to you because you've worked with parents, you've worked with educators, you've worked with coaches, like you just mentioned there, and now you're working in business. I know too, because Generation Z is now working in the business world, and you obviously are the expert in this, right? So, but we're going to lock in really on just coaches for the majority of this conversation, and I'm thinking there's many challenges that you map out in Generation Z Unfiltered in that book, and I really love those. There's so many challenges with this new generation. As a coach, we can want to take on all of them. But really, if we're to take on a few of them, right? Because there's so much that has to happen at the home and in education. But what do you see are maybe some of the biggest challenges that coaches can help these young people with?
Yeah. I think the two biggest overarching realities that we're going to find in Gen Z student athletes or students in general are they will bring with them, if they're like the rest of their cohort, a high sense of agency and a high sense of anxiety. High agency, high anxiety. So let me explain. Agency is simply an educator's term for they come to us with a pretty good sense of self-sufficiency. I'm awesome, and I know it. And I have a smartphone, so I don't even need you. That's the feeling they have sometimes. And we're kind of put off by that, going, what in the world? What are you talking about? You don't need me, that sort of thing. But they are asking questions of Siri, Alexa, and Google that kids used to ask their coach or mom and dad. So high sense of agency. And by the way, at the college level, don't we see this with the portal and with coming in with NIL deals? I think of, what's going on out there. It's just crazy because it's been democratized. It's almost like these 18-year-olds are feeling their oats right now. So that's high agency. But what's ironic is at the same time, they come in with high sense of anxiety. So mental health issues, even in student athletes, are gigantic. Now, certainly physical activity helps them. And by definition, they're in physical activity. But I'm telling you, we've never seen this. Kids that are growing up in a middle-class home, not in a dysfunctional home, a middle-class home, are fighting depression and panic attacks and, just anxiety disorders. So I'm thinking of how many student athletes I've read about over the last 5 years that they completed suicide. And I would have never guessed they were vulnerable to completing suicide. They were so happy on Instagram, and yet look what happened. So I'll stop there, but I feel like those are challenges. And I'll talk in just a minute about what we can do, but get ready, coach. High agency, that's going to be almost off-putting to you, and high anxiety, which will probably make you think, what in the world? Why would you be struggling with that? You've got a good life. You should hear my life when I was growing up. Back in the day, we'd have that history lesson we got for them. So I'll stop there, but I feel like that's two big ones that we're probably going to have to, let me just add one more. I think one of the challenges we may have, depending on the temperament of the coach, is they are really requesting, in their own words, relationship-based coaching. So not X's and O's based, although we need to get to X's and O's. We want to win ball games, meets, and matches. But they are really wanting, and maybe more than wanting, a relationship with their coach. They want their coach to know them outside of them as a player. You follow what I'm saying? So don't know me just as an X on the whiteboard, but my grandma's sick, or my dog, or whatever, And even though that may sound foolish to a coach that just wants to win ball games, if we at least begin with, I want to get to know you, we'll get so much more out of them on the field. So let me stop there.
Well, let's dig in on that for just a minute here, because certainly a lot of the work that we do with coaches and we talk about on this podcast is the importance of that connection.
Yeah.
Yet I think sometimes the challenge is, as a Gen Xer or a millennial trying to connect with Gen Z, it's different, right, from my peer group, or even what my peer group was when I was a teenager. The way that we connect is different. So what would you say to us as coaches that are trying to connect with this foreign generation, in a sense? How can we begin to meet that need for our young people?
I'll just throw out a couple of ideas, and all of you listeners, you can eat the fish and spit out the bones here, okay? So take whatever's relevant. I have found, as I have coached, taught, led somehow the next generation, I tell myself a little acronym when I approach them. And we've all heard the term, here's a leg you have to stand on, the leg we have to stand on. So it's A-LEG, A-L-E-G. The letter A means, instead of just stepping up and telling them something or coaching them in something, I need to ask questions. So we start with questions, not with statements. So I actually formulate in my mind 2 or 3 or 4 questions I want to ask them that will communicate, I want to get to know you better. That's huge. I know it feels like a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It will pay great dividends if you'll ask before you tell. The letter L, it's a natural next one. Listen well. So how many times do we ask questions because we're supposed to, but we don't even bother listening? We're just waiting for our turn to talk. So listen well. Take that teenage athlete and stop. I know you're coaching a women's, young girls basketball team. Listen to them. It blows them away that someone our age would stop and actually give them a voice. By the way, I heard a great quote from a psychologist, Gary Augsburger. It said, being heard is so close to feeling loved that for many people, it's indistinguishable. So just hearing them out, it feels like an appropriate way to say, I love you, son. I love you, daughter, or whatever. So ask questions, listen well. The letter E in leg is empathize. So when I listen, they feel heard. When I empathize, they feel understood. And so many Gen Zers, when it comes to our generation, they don't feel understood. In fact, most of the time we're frustrated, not fascinated by them. Isn't that true? We're not fascinated by this new world they're in. And they can tell by our facial expressions, we're just frustrated at their lack of work ethic or lack of grit. So if we're empathizing, we're really communicating, man, I bet that made you feel awful when that happened. Now, coach listening, I know that may not be your style. Just put this on the back burner and think about it. Now, the letter G is guide. So when I ask, listen, and empathize, I've earned my right to guide them. And you do need to guide them. They need you as a coach. They don't know they need you, but they need you. But I'm telling you, I do far better. This Mr. Dr. Elmore here with a few answers in my head, I do better if I'll ask and listen and empathize before I offer the guidance. Yeah.
I love that. I think the great challenge is, two things. And that one is we have to enter that with the right mindset towards them. We
Yeah.
really have to see the person. If
Yeah.
we're only using these style or these tools that
Yes.
you're giving
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
to get to them and to get them to do it, they'll see that, right? So they'll
Right.
know if we're authentic or not. I think the other thing too is we've been operating a certain way as a coach for so long, and we've been coached for so long with a more authoritarian, kind of autocratic type leadership style. And here you're talking about guiding, which, the interesting thing is, as I've gotten into the business of coaching coaches, I've learned, this whole profession of coaching executives and business world, it's all about guiding. It's coming in there and it's helping them on their journey. And when we do that, it really does transform that relationship.
Yes.
And it's super powerful, but it's really difficult to kind of retrain yourself. I don't know if you could speak to that.
I'd love to. So I think of old school coaches that really were good back in the day. We need to move from God to guide. So we were gods, but Woody Hayes, Bear Bryant, whatever, Nick Saban, even, just over the top authoritarian. You're so right. So we need to be guides, not gods. And I know that sounds stupid, but be thinking, I just want to guide you. I just want to guide you. I just want to guide you. We're going to get to the outcome you want to get to, but I'll be your guide. And then I think we need to move from authoritarian to authentic. So one of our habitude images, we love to teach leadership with images, is guard dog or guide dog. So let me give you this real quick. It's a helpful metaphor. And for coaches, feel free to take this and use it. So we have given canines many jobs over the years as human beings. Two of the most popular jobs are the guard dog and the guide dog. So the guard dog's job is to protect. They're in a pen and they're growling at intruders, sniffing out trouble, barking at something that may go wrong. They're there to protect. The guide dog's job is so different. They're with someone that doesn't see very well, maybe not at all. And so they're going first. They're taking initiative. They're being vulnerable. They're being transparent by their initiative, right? I mean, let's be honest. They're the eyes. I think, especially in this weird, funky world that we're coaching in right now, that's full of anxiety, these student athletes long for a guide dog, not a guard dog. But most of the time, we're guard dogs. We want to protect our assets, our coaching schemas. We want to protect the wins. And naturally we do. If we're a boss of a company, we want to guard the money. But what they're longing for, coach, is a guide dog who is going first. Maybe saying, and by going first, maybe we're sharing our story of a flop or a fumble we did back in the day and saying, listen, I made my own set of mistakes, but listen, we can overcome these. But we're not leading with barking out orders. We're leading with, can I share a ridiculous, idiotic thing I did back when I was in high school myself? Oh my gosh, that just liberates them. So we move, like I said, authoritarian to authentic is what they're asking for. So in your mind, coach, listener, I'm saying think guide dog, not guard dog. Yeah.
I love that. And so as we are a guide dog for our athletes, if I was to just change or help Gen Z, student athletes today fix one thing that you talk about in your book, Generation Z Unfiltered, it would be this growing sense of entitlement. We don't even have to really kind of define that too much because every coach knows it. They feel it so much. And we just want our players to be more grateful because they've got, in our opinion, life better than anybody's ever had it, though it's in many arguments there's some arguments that it's not actually better. But just, so when it comes to entitlement of our athletes, if we could just fix that one thing, what approach, would the guide coach take?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, entitlement levels are high in Gen Z. There's no doubt about it. And that is in the book for sure. Interestingly, entitlement levels have gone slightly down from millennials. So if you looked at a data set of all the generations that are on a campus today, millennials would be highest and then Gen Z slightly below. But there is still a big dose of it. I think the reason for that is we as adults and primarily parents have given them what they should earn as a generation. And I know I sound like your grandpa right now, but we have given them what should, oh, this should be part of the scholarship, or this should be part of the perk I get, a free jacket or whatever, and we're just expecting stuff to be given to us. And that's not good. Shame on us as adults who, and maybe it's mom and dad, have done stuff that they shouldn't have done. One anecdote to this, I might say, we partner with a number of teams, and one that's coming to my mind is the University of Michigan basketball team. We came up with a habitude for them called fountains or drains, and it's all about gratitude. Gratitude tends to be the opposite of entitlement. Think about this. When I'm entitled, I feel I deserve this. I don't even have to thank you. I deserve this. It should be mine. When I'm grateful, I'm going, oh my gosh, coach, thank you so much for giving me some playing time. I'm so grateful for that. Or mom and dad, thanks for feeding me every night. I even get choked up just thinking about what gratitude does. I told my own kids, if you are grateful, you could probably have my bank account. I'm so grateful that you're grateful. So if we can teach that, use fountains and drains. Fountains and drains, think about it. They're both about water. Drains are water going inward and downward, right? That's what a drain does. Fountains are going upward and outward. When I am grateful, when my coach stops us before practice and say, give me one thing you're thankful for, it forces the brain in that student athlete to go, you know what? I'm thankful that blah, 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 blah. And it may be a simple thing, but if we can teach them to focus on what others have done for them, it usually reduces the entitlement. I know that's simple, but I would say that would be one answer to that.
Yeah, and I think there's some experience as an athlete and a coach that I really connect to what you're sharing there around things being earned,
Yes.
and not just given. And I remember as an athlete going to the Morgan Wooten basketball camp in Frostburg, Maryland, and this was supposed to be one of the best youth basketball camps at the time. And my parents heard about it, but they said, hey, if you want to go to this camp, you're going to have to work this summer and you're going to have to help out around the house so you can earn the spot to this camp. Yeah. I sense myself as a parent, I have to push pause. I got a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, a 2-year-old. And so we're not there yet, but I'm like, oh, I want to pay for the whole camp because the camp will be good for them.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm taken away. Like and I'm sure my parents said, yeah, this is great. He dreams, he has a dream to play college basketball, all these things. But for some reason, I sense myself as a millennial parent just going, oh, this is a good thing. So I need to pay for the whole thing. And we've had to press pause on some of that stuff. Like, hey, you're going to have to chip in here if this is something you really want to do. And I think what happens is they have a greater sense of gratitude to that. And one way I've seen this take place in coaching is fundraisers. I mean, I think traditional fundraisers in sports used to be wash the car, make the pancakes, do stuff like that. Now it's send a text message that's copied and pasted to 20 people asking for money. So like I think this speaks to what you're talking about, right?
It does. It certainly does. And I'll tell you what else, giving them stuff like this, which feels good to the parent. By the way, what you said totally makes sense. Of course, we want to help them with this money or with this camp or whatever, but we're stealing ownership. We're stealing a sense of ownership. When I work for something, and by the way, I went to Bobby Leonard's sports camp way back as an 11-year-old boy, and mom and dad made me work for that thing. And I got homesick. I would, blah, blah, blah. But here's the point. My mom and dad were so good at knowing what a sense of ownership would do for me. And I worked a job at age 12, throwing newspapers on driveways. And I know I sound like the grandpa right now, but I am so glad for how they raised me. And maybe coaches listening, especially coaches that are parents, we need to find ways to not steal the ownership. Think with me for just a minute about this analogy. By the way, I have an acronym that I use in the book called PROVE, PROVE. We need to lead with problems. So lead with a problem, not a game plan. The letter R is lead with relationships, not X's and O's. The letter O is ownership. So I'm talking about that now. V is visuals. Use visuals to communicate the big ideas. And then E is experiences. Experiential learning is huge today. So let me talk about ownership real quick. High school football back in my day. So this would be, I'm old, so get ready. This is back in the 70s, okay? I remember it was usually a junior or senior that played quarterback. And when a play was over, they'd huddle up. Not once did they look over to the sideline. That quarterback knew the next play, and he was on it. He led his team as a fellow teammate. Today, you watch Friday Night Football, plays over, they're looking at the sideline. tell us what to do, tell us what to do, tell us what to do. And the coach says, do it that way because my job's on the line. If we don't win enough, I'll lose my job. I'm telling you, coaches, we're doing a disservice when we don't teach ownership on their part. So I know I'm ranting and raving, but we've got to change the way we lead these kids because the internal locus of control, which we want to see in children, is going away, and it's external locus, which means I'm looking outside for the answers. Mom, coach, teacher. And I'm telling you, it's not healthy. So I'll stop ranting right there, JP, and I'll let you take it over.
This episode is brought to you by the TOC community. Looking for ways to take your coaching to the next level? Our community offers a wealth of resources designed to help you transform your team's culture and drive success on and off the court or field. With access to our online courses like the Culture System Online, the Competitive Cauldron, and Playing Time System, you'll gain the skills and knowledge you need to take your coaching to the next level. And that's just the beginning. As a member of the TOC community, you'll also get access to hundreds of digital resources, including team building activities, player, coach, and culture assessment surveys, and other documented methods and processes to help you build a winning culture. But it's not just about the resources. You'll also get to connect with other coaches from around the world through our group chat and participate in multiple book studies and roundtable discussions each month. If you're ready to take your coaching to the next level, join the TOC community today by visiting tocculture.com.
Well, I think a related issue that a lot of coaches deal with, and certainly this is over the course of time, not unique to Gen Z, but a different manifestation perhaps, is just the level of accountability. How do we hold players accountable for the weight room sessions and showing up to practice and being a good teammate and doing that in a way that is productive rather than confrontational, and then ultimately oftentimes ends in some sort of severance, right? A player just decides to leave or a coach is pushed out. And so, when it comes to conflict and accountability, where do you guide coaches, just try to navigate that minefield?
Yeah, it's a huge one. So everywhere we go, for whatever it's worth, we hear this lack of accountability. Part of the reason for this is a generation that grew up with a smart device. So they feel like they don't need us like kids once needed us. They got training going on YouTube. And by the way, they might have a personal trainer at 16 years old. And then there's the coach, and then there's mom and dad. Many of them have 5 or 6 different coaches in their life. So they feel like they don't need the accountability. So here's an image I use for accountability. It's called sturdy guardrails. Sturdy guardrails. Think about when you're driving on a dark road at night and the road is bending and going over cliffs and bridges. You want guardrails on that road, don't you? Of course you do. In fact, they're always on that road during bends or bridges because that's the time you're vulnerable to get off. I would communicate to my student athletes, let's talk about guardrails for a minute. And they're going to feel like it's really random. But you basically convince them you need guardrails, stay on that right road to get to where you want to go. Accountability is your guardrail. Invite accountability from me, from your teammates, from someone. But guardrails keep us on the path. Otherwise, we might veer off. And coach, you might want to say, here's the story from my life when I got off the path back when I was 18 years old. And I hate myself for it. So tell stories on yourself, be a guide dog. But guardrails are what we need to keep us on the right road. We all want to stay on the right road. And I would think that's going to help a little bit. The only other thing I'd say, Nate, on this one is for Gen Z, we have to ask for permission to hold them accountable. I know the hair on the back of the neck of some coaches listening right now just stood up straight because that feels so awful. But I'm telling you, I know you're the coach. I know you got the badge. But when you say, hey, students, listen to me. May I have your permission to hold you accountable? I'd love to win a championship this year. And if you'll let me, it still feels, now you're giving ownership to them. And when they say yes, you can refer back. Remember back in September, you said, I could hold you accountable. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just doing what you told me to do. I think that's going to be important because then it doesn't feel it's expose, don't impose. You expose them to good things. You're not imposing yourself upon them. And that's the way I think they need to be led. Yeah.
Well, let me follow that a little bit because, ultimately having some of those crucial conversations or those difficult conversations when a player misses 4 or 5 practices and then they're going to be held out of a game. This is the consequence or the standard that we agreed upon at the start of the year. And we shared it with your parents at the parent meeting. but now we have to sit down and we have to
Yeah.
talk about this.
Enforce it.
You've got
Yeah.
a lot of great tools for coaches, and as JP mentioned before, this is becoming an issue in the workplace as well, as Gen Z is
Yep.
now, moving through their college years and starting to enter the workforce. So what advice do you give us when those crucial conversations need to happen? How
Yeah.
do we approach those as coaches?
Well, a couple of thoughts come to my mind. Number one, this is the real reason why it's so important to establish that relationship up front and build it and build it and build it. As you're building the relationship, you're earning pocket change. You're getting emotional change in your pocket. Then when you got to spend some on a hard conversation, it's much easier, not easy, but easier when you have a relationship. We've all tried to confront a kid when we have no relationship. It is almost impossible. When I've got a relationship, there tends to be a bit of a bridge there rather than a wall. The other thing I would say is, can I give you another image? Ready or not, here it comes. This is a brand new image that's in our latest Habitude book. It's called Surgeons and Vampires. So this seems like a random couplet, don't you think? Surgeons and vampires. But think about what they have in common. Surgeons and vampires both have blood in common. But here's the big difference. A vampire sneaks up on someone in a darkened room, bites them on the neck, drains the blood out of them, and the victim usually falls over dead. Or they've turned into a vampire themselves, okay? Surgeon draws blood as well, and it's not fun. Nobody looks forward to surgery, but it's very different. Well-lit room, everybody's prepared. That doctor or she has gone through a lot of preparation for this surgery. And then the surgery simply takes out the one part. He doesn't slice up your body all over the place, just that one tumor, just that one cancer. That's what I'm going to work on. I think far too often we confront kids like a vampire. We sneak up and we're yelling and screaming or whatever we're doing. And I'm telling you, what they need is a surgeon, not a vampire. And by the way, I'm guilty of this. With my own kids as teenagers, I would be a vampire. In fact, I developed another image. When my kids were younger, I led my house like a quarterback, inspiring the team, moving the ball down the field. When they turned into teenagers, I turned into a referee, calling fouls, telling them where they're out of bounds, throwing flags. Nobody wants to be led by a referee, and nobody goes to a football game to see a referee. But coaches, far too often, our attitude is a referee attitude, and they feel it, and they go, I don't want to perform for you. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but we've got to change the very spirit in which we coach. When we begin with belief, we're a surgeon, not a vampire, and we're a quarterback, not a referee.
Well, and here's what I would add to that too. When a surgeon goes through a procedure that takes so much blood away, they replace it, right? And that's part of our job too. There's confrontation, but there's then a repair of the relationship.
Yeah.
There's a follow-up of the connection. That's just as important.
That's brilliant. I'm going to steal that.
All right, we're going to take a break in our conversation with Dr. Tim Elmore. Listening to him, I recognized a few things. One is the ways that we used to coach and lead are now more than ever outdated. So working with Generation Z, it starts with a mindset shift. We need to move from seeing ourselves as the God to seeing ourselves as the guide. For us as transformational coaches, there is a positive. Gen Z athletes, they crave relationship-based coaching more than ever. They want to be known as a person, not just a player. And I see it as a good thing. I love that acronym he gave us, a leg. Give them a leg. Ask questions, listen, empathize, and then guide. At the core of that, though, is a mindset to act more like a guide dog, not a guard dog. Once again, we've got to drop that authoritarian style that is so natural to so many of us as coaches. Probably the thing I've reflected on the most since my conversation with Tim Elmore, though, is the sense of the importance of gratitude. How gratitude battles entitlement. Now, if you don't already subscribe to the TOC newsletter, I highly recommend doing that because I've got some great articles on ways that we can practically teach and train gratitude within our athletes. So you're going to want to make sure you check those out. My last takeaway from our conversation today is it's a great reminder as well that we need to hold players accountable by being a surgeon, not a vampire. What a great visual reminder. First, ask for permission, and then we need to make consequences clear so they're not surprised. They know exactly what is happening. Now, in part 2 of our conversation with Tim Elmore, we are going to shift to discussing the parents of Gen Z, how to best partner with them, and then leading Generation Z in the workplace. I know many of our coaches, athletic directors, and club administrators, they're working with Generation Z coaches. In fact, some of you Gen Z coaches are listening to this episode right now. Hopefully you're not offended, but you're encouraged that leaders are working to be more intentional and connecting and working with you. So I think you'll really appreciate, regardless of what generation you fall into, I think you'll really appreciate what Tim has to share with us in next week's episode as well. So thank you for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it if you found it valuable. And leave us a nice review when you get the chance.